Welcome to our deep dive today into the world of Bitcoin. Um, it's always fascinating. You've sent us some really interesting sources that point to, well, a crucial moment for Bitcoin, a crossroads, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at how major corporations, like, the big ones, Microsoft, for example,
Hmm.
how they're approaching Bitcoin.
Right.
And then we'll contrast that with the efforts to protect, individual Bitcoin use at the state level. So by the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll have a clear understanding of not just what's happening with Bitcoin right now, but also why it matters for the future of money and technology. Big stuff.
It is. Yeah, it's a fascinating time to be looking at Bitcoin, that's for sure. We're seeing, a real push and pull
Yeah.
between these established institutions
Yeah.
and this decentralized disruptive technology
Yeah.
and the decisions being made now, both by those corporations and lawmakers, I mean. It could have ripple effects for years to come. It's big.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's unpack this Microsoft situation first.
Yeah.
It seems like they're facing a real dilemma here. There's this shareholder proposal on the table that's urging them to allocate 1%, just 1% of their, well, considerable assets to Bitcoin.
That's right. The proposal,
Mhm.
it's coming from the National Center for Public Policy Research.
Yeah.
And they're positioning Bitcoin as like a potential hedge against inflation, with all the economic uncertainty.
Right.
Their argument is that adding Bitcoin to Microsoft's portfolio could be a, well, strategically sound move.
Yeah, it makes sense on the surface. But here's the interesting twist. Microsoft's board is actually recommending a no vote on the proposal.
Yeah.
They say, they're already exploring all these asset classes, including cryptocurrencies,
Hmm.
and they've got systems for managing their investment.
There's a nuance to their hesitation, though. They acknowledge crypto,
Mm.
but they're not sold on a dedicated Bitcoin allocation. Like, it's not a full embrace.
Yeah.
So it suggests a certain level of, I don't know, caution, likely stemming from Bitcoin's volatility. It's no secret Bitcoin's price swings. They don't exactly scream stable,
Yeah.
which is, what corporations usually look for. Stability.
Yeah.
When it comes to their
It's
reserve.
the responsible thing to do, right? I mean, from a corporate perspective. And then you have BlackRock, this massive investment management corporation who also happens to be Microsoft's second largest shareholder.
Right.
And they're not just, dipping their toes into Bitcoin. They're diving in head first. They're increasing their holdings. And then there's their push for Bitcoin ETFs,
Right.
which could make investing in Bitcoin, well, much more accessible to everyday investors. So
That's the element that really throws a wrench into things. BlackRock's stance and their growing Bitcoin stake. I mean, it could absolutely sway other Microsoft shareholders, and it creates a fascinating dynamic. On one side, you have that inherent corporate aversion to risk. They like to play it safe. And on the other, you have this growing institutional acceptance of Bitcoin, driven in part by a major player, BlackRock.
yeah.
So the outcome of this vote, it could send a powerful signal to the entire corporate world about Bitcoin's legitimacy as an investment.
It's almost like a litmus test for corporate Bitcoin adoption.
Exactly. If a company with the reputation and resources of Microsoft embraces Bitcoin, even in a limited capacity, it could open the floodgates.
Yeah.
I mean, other companies could just follow suit.
Yeah.
It could be a domino effect.
Right. So we have these high stakes decisions playing out at the corporate level.
Yeah.
But what about the everyday individual? Where do they fit into this evolving Bitcoin landscape?
That's where the work of the Satoshi Action Fund comes in. They're championing this initiative to create, well, state-level safe havens for Bitcoin custody and transactions.
So they're trying to establish legal sanctuaries
Yeah.
for Bitcoin users,
Right.
allowing them to operate without the looming threat of federal restrictions.
You got it. They're employing what they call a bottom-up approach. It's similar to the strategy that the cannabis industry used successfully, I might add.
Right.
So by building support at the state level, they aim to, well, create momentum that could eventually influence federal policy. They're playing the long game.
So it's about circumventing those roadblocks at the federal level by creating these pockets of acceptance where Bitcoin can thrive. But what are the potential ramifications of this approach, both for the adoption of Bitcoin and the future of its regulation? I mean, is it really going to work?
That's the question, isn't it? That's a question worth exploring. And we'll delve into the potential impact of the Satoshi Action Fund's efforts in part 2 of this deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive, exploring Bitcoin's crossroads, Before we move on from the Satoshi Action Fund's strategy, I'm kind of curious about the potential challenges they might encounter with this whole bottom-up approach. is it really feasible? I mean, can you really create this patchwork of state-level protections? And can that actually effectively circumvent federal regulations? I don't know. It seems tricky.
It's definitely ambitious, no doubt.
Okay.
And it won't be a smooth ride. There will be hurdles. Like, for example, one potential challenge is the sheer complexity of navigating this fragmented regulatory landscape. Just imagine you have a scenario where, Bitcoin transactions are treated differently across states. I mean,
That would be a nightmare.
it would create so much confusion for
Yeah.
businesses, for individuals, everyone.
Mm.
And that could actually hinder the seamless adoption that the Satoshi Action Fund wants. Right?
Yeah. So instead of simplifying things for users, it could actually make things more complicated in the short term.
Exactly. And it really underscores the need for clear communication
Yep.
from the Satoshi Action Fund. They need to educate the public, policymakers, everyone,
Yeah.
about the benefits of their approach. And they need to address those concerns about potential inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be there.
It sounds like a real balancing act between promoting, individual freedom and ensuring that there's some level of regulatory clarity so Bitcoin can actually flourish.
You got it, a tightrope walk. And it brings us back to that interplay between corporate adoption and, individual user rights. Think about it. If companies like Microsoft, even with all their resources, are hesitant to fully embrace Bitcoin because of this regulatory uncertainty at the federal level, imagine the challenges for individuals
Yeah.
navigating a patchwork of state laws.
Absolutely. It's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Wider adoption to push for regulations or clear regulations to allow for wider adoption? I don't know.
Exactly. And that's where the Satoshi Action Fund's effort could be really instrumental. If they can demonstrate that state-level safe havens can work, it puts pressure on the federal government to create a more unified and supportive regulatory framework.
So these grassroots efforts, they could actually pave the way for the broader acceptance of Bitcoin. And maybe then companies like Microsoft will feel more comfortable making those big investments.
That's the hope. That's the long game,
Yeah.
creating a groundswell of support that can shift the narrative and influence decision-making
Mm.
at the highest levels.
Okay. Let's switch gears for a second and talk about Bitcoin's price action. We mentioned it earlier, but there's a lot to unpack here. So as of right now, Bitcoin is hovering around $67,900. It got close to $69,000 earlier this week. It's been an interesting month.
It has. It's been moving up throughout October. But what's really noteworthy, it's not just the price. It's the surge in open interest. Across derivatives markets, we're nearing an all-time high, $37.6 billion. And that indicates significant activity, speculation. I mean, people are really betting on Bitcoin's future.
So for those of us who don't, speak fluent derivatives, could you break it down? What does this surge in open interest actually mean? And how could it impact the market? What should people be looking out for?
Okay, so derivatives, they're financial instruments that get their value from an underlying asset, in this case, Bitcoin. And they let traders bet on future price movements without actually owning any Bitcoin.
So it's like they're placing bets on whether the price of Bitcoin will go up or down, kind of like gambling.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. A simplified way to think about it,
Yeah.
there are, different types of derivatives, like futures contracts, options, that each have their own quirks. But the key takeaway here is that a surge in open interest means more traders are entering these contracts. And that usually means increased speculation, potential volatility. Things could get interesting.
So all this activity in the derivatives market, it's suggesting that traders are anticipating big moves for Bitcoin, maybe in the coming months.
Yeah, it's a reasonable assumption. And historical trends also support this view. You see, the last quarter of the year, especially after these halving periods, it's often been good for Bitcoin. And, well, we're in one of those post-halving periods right now. So it adds another layer of intrigue.
You mentioned halving. Could you explain that? For those who might not be familiar with the term, what does it mean? And why is it so significant for Bitcoin's price? I think some people might be wondering.
Sure. Halving is this pre-programmed event. It's in Bitcoin's code. And it happens about every 4 years. Basically, the rate at which new Bitcoins are created, it gets cut in half. And historically, this reduction in supply, it's been associated with upward price pressure. Because, well, there are fewer new coins entering the market. Simple supply and demand.
So the scarcity created by this halving event, that could be driving the bullish sentiment we're seeing right now, especially when you combine it with all this activity in the derivatives market. I mean, it all seems to point in one direction.
It's definitely one of the factors at play, but we have to remember, market sentiment is fickle. It can change quickly. So while there's a lot of optimism about Bitcoin's long-term prospects, the short-term trajectory is still uncertain. A lot of things can influence it. Regulations, macroeconomic trends, you name it.
Right. It's a reminder that anyone thinking about investing in Bitcoin, they got to do their research. They can't just rely on short-term price fluctuations or, get caught up in the hype of the market. It's got to be an informed decision.
Absolutely. Informed decision-making is key for any investment. Bitcoin is no different.
Okay, so we have all these market indicators pointing to potential price movements. But how do traders actually view the situation? Are they leaning bullish or bearish? What's the general sentiment?
Well, the data shows something interesting. You see, while the historical trends and the recent surge in open interest might suggest a bullish bias, traders are actually pretty balanced. The long-short ratio is relatively even, meaning there's an almost even split between those betting on the price going up, long positions, and those betting on it going down, short positions. So it's a mixed bag.
So the market's kind of divided. No clear consensus on Bitcoin's immediate future. Is this like a turning point, or is it just, Bitcoin being Bitcoin, volatile and unpredictable?
That's the million-dollar question. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does.
Fair enough. Well, we can't predict the future, that's for sure. But we can arm ourselves with knowledge and understanding to navigate these complexities. And, speaking of knowledge, I think it's time to circle back to those philosophical underpinnings of Bitcoin that we touched on earlier. I think there's a lot more to explore there.
Yeah, absolutely. In part 3, we'll explore the core principles that make Bitcoin so appealing.
Yeah.
And we'll look at its potential impact on the future of money and technology. It's going to be fascinating.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into Bitcoin's crossroads. It's been, well, a fascinating journey so far, from corporate dilemmas to, grassroots efforts, state-level stuff, and of course the market movements. What a ride.
It really has been. Multifaceted, to say the least. Practical realities, philosophical implications, it's all connected.
It is. And that's actually where I want to focus now in this last part, this idea of decentralization. And we've touched on it, but I think it deserves, a deeper dive. A financial system that operates independently of governments, central banks. It's a radical concept when you really think about it.
It challenges, well, everything we know about traditional finance.
Yeah.
I mean, for centuries, we've relied on these centralized institutions to control our money, issue currency. Bitcoin flips that on its head. It's a distributed network, a global community of computers all working together to validate record transactions. It's a whole different ballgame.
So instead of a central authority like a big bank or a government calling the shots, it's more like a collective agreement, a shared understanding of how the system works.
That's the core of it. The rules of Bitcoin, they're embedded in the code, the Bitcoin protocol, open source. Anyone can access it. That transparency, it builds trust, accountability. Everyone can verify the integrity of the network. No secrets.
But hold on, if there's no central authority, who's making sure everyone follows the rules? Who stops bad actors from messing things up? It seems a little, chaotic maybe.
That's where the blockchain comes in. Every transaction, it's cryptographically secured, linked to previous transactions. An immutable chain of records. It's practically impossible to alter the system without being detected.
So it's self-regulating, this balance of cryptography, game theory, consensus. Wow.
Exactly. And that's what gives Bitcoin its resilience. It's resistant to censorship. No single entity can control it, shut it down, or manipulate it. It's pretty powerful.
Powerful indeed, especially these days when we're all more aware of the limitations, the biases of centralized institutions. Bitcoin offers an alternative.
An alternative that resonates with people who value freedom, autonomy, transparency. For them, Bitcoin's a path to a more equitable, inclusive financial system. One that empowers individuals, not just a select few.
It's like a digital expression of those values. Individual sovereignty in code.
That's a great way to put it. It highlights why Bitcoin's more than just a digital currency, an investment. It's a movement, a philosophy, a glimpse into a future where technology can empower individuals, reshape the systems that govern our lives.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it back to our listener. What's the key takeaway here? What's the one thing you want them to remember?
I'd say look at Bitcoin not just as a technology, but as a catalyst for societal change. Whether you invest in it or not, understand the principles it embodies, the potential it has to transform how we interact with money, with technology, with each other.
It's a conversation that goes beyond price charts, market predictions. It's about empowerment, financial freedom, and technology's potential to reshape our society. It's big.
It is. And as with any transformative technology, there will be challenges, uncertainties, setbacks. But the questions Bitcoin raises about trust, control, power. These are questions that will shape our world for years to come.
And that's where our deep dive into Bitcoin's crossroads comes to an end. Hopefully you found it insightful, thought-provoking, maybe even a little inspiring. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And remember, the world of Bitcoin, this whole decentralized landscape, it's constantly evolving. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep an open mind. This frontier is just getting started.